Strangers in this town, they raise you up just to cut you down. Oh, Angela, it's a long time coming. Oh, Angela, spent your whole life running away. Oh, delay.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to EPCOR's Go EV program webinar. We're looking forward to introducing you to the funding available through us for electric vehicle charging stations. Remember, epcor.com/goev is the website to apply for funding and for all the latest information you can find on there, including a Q&A section. So there's a couple ways that you can participate today. We have the chat function, so feel free to put your comments in there. Just make sure that you have your chat set to send to everyone, not just panelists, so that everybody can see it who's in the webinar today. There is also a Q&A feature, so throughout the webinar, please put your questions in there. There will be ample time after the presentation for questions. And then we also have the raised hand function. So if you have a question during our Q&A portion of this morning's webinar, you can raise your hand and I will ask you to unmute and you can voice your question aloud to Darren or Bill, who will be presenting to you today. If we get disconnected for any reason, please stay close to your email and we will send you further instructions. I will now turn it over to Darren McCrank, EPCOR's Director of Ontario Operations.
Thank you, Lindsay. Good morning, everybody. As Lindsay mentioned, I'm Darren McCrank, Director of Operations here at EPCOR. Director of Operations for Ontario's operations. And I'd first like to acknowledge that I'm located on Treaty 18 territory here in Collingwood, traditional lands of the Anishinaabe and Huron-Wendat peoples. EPCOR represents the histories, languages, and cultures of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and all First Peoples of Canada, whose presence continues to enrich our vibrant community. Some of you may be familiar with EPCOR as a natural gas or electricity provider, but let me provide a brief overview to give context in how we were selected by the federal government to provide funding for its zero emission vehicle infrastructure program. EPCOR has more than 125-year history providing electricity and utility services. And under our original name, we were actually the first municipally owned electric utility in Canada. Fast forward to present day, and we're providing electricity, natural gas, and water services to approximately 2 million people in Canada and the United States. Our operations in Canada span from British Columbia, Alberta, where we're headquartered in Edmonton, to Saskatchewan and here in Ontario. Next slide, please, Lindsay. So we're not new to providing electricity services or our familiarity with the electric vehicle industry, but we are relatively new to the Ontario market, with operations beginning here in 2018. We're continuing to expand and are currently building much needed infrastructure in rural Ontario to bring affordable and reliable natural gas services to communities in the area. The EPCOR Go EV program is our latest endeavor to support communities towards a sound energy transition for the future. And as we work to collectively reduce our environmental footprint, we're eager to provide more options for commuters to energize their vehicles. So I'll now pass it on to Bill Harvey, who is our program manager for the EPCOR Go EV program, and he'll provide an overview of the program and how to apply for funding. Bill?
Thank you, Darren, and thanks to all the participants that's joining us this morning. Going to our first slide of the presentation, EPCOR was selected by Natural Resources Canada to engage with the ZVIP program that you may already be familiar with, the Zero Emission Vehicle Infrastructure Program. It's a funding initiative to engage the public and private sector as well to adopt electric vehicles through enhancement of the available charging infrastructure that's necessary to go with the ownership of EV vehicles, or electric vehicles, as you say. And with that, our effort is a representation of that program on a more granular and community-oriented basis. The funding is from the same sponsorship of the federal government, but the administration of the program, again, is more insightful and I'd probably say proactive and participatory with the interested parties that want to adopt and install EV charging on their properties. We're here to provide not only oversight, but assistance in the application process and review of the development as proposed for retail locations, municipal parking, recreational centers, multiple residential units such as condominiums, apartments, and we can get into the details of how the program is expansed through various community interests. Next slide. Good. Do we have the next slide, please? Thank you. Just a bit of adding to Darren's description of EPCOR and how we were selected with representing NRCan in this endeavor. We've been involved with the EV space for about 10 years and most recently have engaged with an EV charging program with the deployment of a number of charging stations throughout Edmonton through our EPCOR affiliate. We're aligned with many industries and public institutions in the achievement of greenhouse gas reduction goals and other corporate initiatives towards the enhancement of and adoption of electric vehicle ownership and general adoption. Next. Just going on about the need of the program, as we mentioned, the federal government in particular has set zero emission goals for 2050, and as a catalyst have set an objective of transitioning all new vehicle sales to zero emission vehicles by 2035. So having said that, as you look around your street corner or up and down your main street of any given town, you may notice certain electric vehicle stations existing, but not enough to encourage you to go out and buy an electric vehicle, because unless you're charging at home, which many people will ultimately do, you're not comfortable in the sense that you can go anywhere. And as we're familiar with the gas station model of today, know that you can drop in conveniently at any given location, population, town, intersection, find a gas station to plug in to keep going. The mindset and the whole culture of electric vehicle ownership is different than what we're familiar with internal combustion engine cars. But one of the key things that we're engaged to provide is additional and widespread charging facilities for your convenience and amenities as you conduct your lifestyle, where you go to the grocery store, you go to the bowling alley, you go to the restaurant, you go to the sportsplex. Regardless, that's the intent of what this program is to get the chargers out there with the participation of both the public and private sector interests. With respect to going forward, we have this program for funding. And if I could have the next slide, please. Just to embellish my earlier assertion that electric vehicle adoption, although viewed today may be a bit of a challenge for certain individuals, the trend is such that electric vehicle sales, Europe and North America, are going up exponentially. And in regard to that transition or of adoption of EV vehicles, you'll see the reduced ownership of and the population of internal combustion engines. And so there's no shortage of data that's coming out to give strong indication that this is going to happen. And for some perspective, the horse has already left the barn, and now we're catching up to identify and remediate the lack of supporting infrastructure through EV charging stations. Just as an insight as to where this program fits in the whole landscape of EV charging initiatives, it's understood that EV charging, for the most part, is going to take place at your home, in residence, for the majority, which makes sense because as your lifestyle and your current schedule, whether you have a night shift job or a day job, if you're a resident at home and you have a charger, you'll plug in during your downtime. I mean, statistically, home vehicles used probably 5% of the time throughout the course of the year. So the remaining time it's parked somewhere. And more often than not, you'll see it parked at home in a driveway. And the intent is to encourage home charging for that purpose. It's most economical once set up, and that's the expectation. But to fill the gap as you travel, be it regionally or in the instance that you don't have home charging available, we'll look to support workplace charging as well as intercity travel, as I mentioned earlier, as you go about your business, be it between communities, looking to charge at your destination or en route to further destinations. We're putting chargers in, again, as I mentioned, at retail, municipal properties, parking lots, sportsplex, the YMCA is an example. And the idea is, with the technology that we have today, both you and your car will know what charging stations are. And in due course, and actually in short order, you'll be comfortable and familiar with where the chargers are, their availability, and you're meeting your expectations that you can get the fill up that you're seeking as you go about your day. The charging program that we're sponsoring here is focused on Southern Georgian Bay region, as generally indicated with the green patch you see in the northern tip of Bruce Peninsula down through Aurelia and Simcoe County. The pin drops indicate areas where EPCOR itself has operations, and our familiarity with the communities in that area gives us some insight and maybe a more granular view of the opportunities to put charging stations in with the participation of yourselves and the general public. The other area that we're focused in is in southwestern Ontario, centered around Aylmer, where our gas distributions network exists, and surrounding communities. These aren't hard borders. We're available to look at opportunities, anywhere in Southern Ontario in general, and we will help with other sponsor organizations such as EPCOR conducting the same program. So there may be some overlap, but we will coordinate with those funding efforts for the intent of ZVIP, which is, again, to fully fund the opportunities that exist in the public for access to EV charging. Next slide. So the eligibility for this funding, it's fairly broad. It's fairly inducive for participation amongst most sectors. I'd say at the outset, the only exclusion is for private residents. As I had indicated, it's expected that private residents charging will represent the majority of charging infrastructure in most communities. So what we're looking for are opportunities where private individuals may not, expect to step up to serve the community, and that's our role, to work with the government at this stage to subsidize or co-fund the opportunity to put chargers in the public. And the locations that we're focusing on are for commercial fleets, taxi cabs, light duty vans of the sort, multi-residential buildings, as I mentioned earlier, condominiums, apartment buildings, complex of that nature where you have 3 or more resident units in that facility. Workplace, any commercial or industrial enterprise. The intent is it's for the employees, but we recognize there are visitors and customers that visit the location. So fundamentally, it's generally accessible by the public, and that's the criteria we look at. On-street parking, as mentioned, supported by various municipalities, public venues, as I mentioned, retail parking, restaurants, grocery stores, the retail malls, again, supporting your lifestyle as you go about your business, much as you do today, but in an electric vehicle. And the type of chargers we're supporting in terms of the technology or general classifications referred to as level 2 or level 3. And level 2, as you may be familiar, is powered by household voltages, as we're familiar, 240 volt, something that is powering your dryer or your washing machine or your stove at your house, and is readily available in most public venues. And with that level of charging, it's a lower capacity and a longer duration charging experience, as we'll call it. And so within an hour, you can expect something in the order of 40-kilometer range, but what is currently being offered in the electric vehicle inventory. That will change. The restriction with level 2 charging, as it is with level 1, as you may be familiar with being a wall plug at 120 volts, it's limited by the converter built into the electric vehicle that takes it from alternating current to DC current to charge your battery. As you go to level 3, however, both the capacities and the duration for charging becomes more convenient. It's a shorter duration with a larger capacity available to charge the battery of the electric vehicle. So in an hour, you can get a few hundred kilometers on average. There are various capacities available for level 3, and as the capacities go up, the duration of charging goes down. But I should note that as the capacities go up for those level 3 units, so do the capital costs. And with that support that we've offered, we looked at level 2, level 3 charging in these categories, where in any given case for an eligible location, the program we're sponsoring offers up to 50% of the total cost, eligible costs of the project, up to a limit on a per connector basis, as you see, $5,000 per level 2 connector, and the various capacity ranges of level 3, $15,000, $50,000, and $75,000 in the capacity categories denoted there for level 3 charging. All the funding available for each applicant for each project is $100,000. And so any combination you can imagine, whether it's a combination of level 2 and level 3 chargers you want to propose for your installation, following this general rule for the categories, your project will be funded up to $100,000, but again, limited to the configuration of how many chargers and what type of charger you're using, as denoted here for the various funding limitations. But we'll help you with that. And again, our objective is to make the application process simple and effective and get the chargers built as soon as possible. The eligible costs that I described or mentioned earlier, I should say, is really to the point of direct costs of the project. So you're talking about the equipment, you're talking about support services such as technical or trades contracting for the supply, the installation, and in-service commissioning of these chargers. And as I'm describing all of this, making it sound complicated, it's not. The chargers are, for the most part, all self-contained, and ideally the industry is set up to make the experience more of a plug-and-play installation proposition than an elaborate engineering development. So as I'm describing all the eligible costs, this is a detailed breakdown that, again, we will work with you directly to identify and ensure that the costs are suitable for, and eligible for funding, and to the point of making a better project, give whatever advice, technical, commercial, we can to enhance your investment for the project and ensure that you get your reimbursement according to the funding rules we just discussed. And we've just described the various funding levels. One note I wanted to add to these points: each applicant can have a project proposal that engages several locations. So you can have one application that addresses multiple locations for deployment of EV charging. So if you are a property owner of parking lots, for example, and you choose to put in a charger at each location, that's appropriate, that's eligible. Conversely, if you're applying for a project, that does not limit any applicant from applying for several projects. So you could, as an applicant, submit several project proposals that may have multiple locations, each again within the funding limitations of $100,000 per project, and the breakdown of cost eligibility per location and selection of charger type, level 2 or level 3. I'll mention as well that with the projects as proposed, they must be new installations, so not a replacement of existing investment, expansion upon that investment. Additional chargers on a location are suitable, and it must be new equipment, and it must be purchased and owned by the applicant as opposed to leased or other forms of commercial procurement. So, the property owners looking to look at various options, we can describe and assist in different ownership models. If you're a property owner and you want to enhance your customer's experience, if you're running a retail operation such as a grocery store, you can avail your property to an applicant who will apply for funding for putting in a charger on your property. You can come to an agreement with the applicant to lease, rent, or otherwise to host the EV charger station on your property, and that's supported and eligible for this funding. Of course, the property owner themselves may apply and fund their own project for the purpose. And lastly, they can engage a third party to put in a charger and come to some negotiation of the ownership and the funding. Principally, each project is bought and paid for by the participant with the expectation that they will get the reimbursement in the funding form we've described. And questions have come up as to, well, is this a commercial proposition? Is it philanthropic? That's the decision of the ownership of the charger project itself. If you want to make it a commercial venue, charging fee by the minute or hour of plug-in time, we can discuss that and assist you with some experiences and data that's out in the industry. On the other hand, if it's for the public, philanthropic purposes or otherwise, that again is your decision. As far as contacting us, we have our email address and, of course, access information from our website. When you do contact us, I will get back to you ideally on the day and respond to your application and or any queries that you have. Again, my objective is to work directly with you to make this a seamless and relatively simple process. and effectively get the desired chargers in place as soon as possible for use in the public. And we're looking forward to your response and interest in this program. Thanks for your time. And I'm available to answer any questions anyone has.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Bill. We have a couple questions here. So the first one is this funding available to marinas?
Electric boats. Yeah, they are. That is marinas, and I'll take that in the sense of a parking area for public access, or marinas owns the parking lot, but it's still accessible to the public. Yeah, that funding is available.
Great.
And should they ever come up with electric boats, I'm sure we'll have an offer at that time as well.
Excellent. Thank you. And Rick, if you have any follow-up questions to that, feel free to put it in the chat, or you can raise your hand and I can ask you to take yourself off mute. So everyone feel free, this is our question and answer period. So feel free to put your questions in the Q&A feature, or you can just pop them in the chat and I will read them off to Bill and Darren here. A couple more questions for you. Can you give some examples of who would not be eligible for the program?
Sure. Yeah, I never want to be negative on any sponsorship as such. The main restriction, and the most commonly asked question, is about funding for private residents. Regardless of the fact that, like many of us these days, are working out of our homes, or maybe have a registered business in our name, and we again have a home office. But again, that is not eligible for this program. It has to be, I guess in concept, a location accessible to the public. And that entails both condominiums, not only for the residents, but the visitors to the properties. And with respect to that, it's believed that the public will take care of their own personal residents and amenities in that respect. That's the expectation. Why we have funding programs as such in this regard is going to put in initiatives where I, as a householder, are not going to contribute to a charger at a parking space at a retail location that maybe I use sometimes. This is more for the public good. So this de facto is a public program for that purpose. I think that's the only restriction. If there were any other locations that were, again, restricted to private membership, not general public, that would be likely not eligible. But I can't think of many locations as such, including country clubs and the like, that if they still exist as such, they still have an open access to the public, and they would be eligible.
Thank you, Bill. It's very helpful. So Rick just commented in the chat, we've already started with electric motors and boats, and he said many members of the marinas have electric vehicles.
Excellent. So I'm looking forward to hearing from Rick and offer a helping hand to get it going.
Perfect. Are replacement EV chargers eligible?
I'll describe replacement as you already have a early generation charger that may not be up to current technical or operational standards as they exist, and you're looking to replace that charger. No, and I struggle with that, but being the rules they are, we're looking for expansion opportunities into the charging space. So I think from the federal government's perspective, it's viewed that if charger infrastructure is in place and operating, then you're eligible to add another charger to the location, but not replace and enhance the one station that you already have. But I will work with the applicants in this regard, because in certain cases, certain charging equipment may not actually qualify as a charger or be recognized as a competent piece of equipment for electric vehicle charging as electric vehicle standards are today. So without too much wiggling, look objectively to the opportunities. The idea is, if you have a competent charging facility and you want to upgrade it, this is not the program for it. You can expand upon your existing facility, but not replace.
That makes sense. Thank you. What if the applicant has multiple properties? Can they submit one application?
Yes.
Great. And would the applicant be responsible for procuring and installing the chargers, or does EPCOR assist in that part?
The applicant's responsible for the entire project. Our role is to advise and give general and objective assistance in the process. We don't make recommendations on any commercial terms or commercial entities, including products. We're agnostic in that regard, but it is recognized that this is an emerging market. They are, the trades associated with the supply and install of this equipment is not well known, and in certain cases, applicants will seek guidance as to who they could contact and objectively evaluate for use in their project, and we can help them with that.
Excellent, thank you.
It's a little more sophisticated than saying I know a guy. I know a lot of guys, and to keep it fair and within the community as best we can, we can make available a breadth of resources that applicants can consider.
That's good to hear. Does the applicant get the full funding per location?
Let me interpret the question. The full funding per location, yes. I'll take it as the full funding is applicable to one location or an application for several locations as one application. One application is limited to up to $100,000. Again, with the limitations on selection of capacity or type of EV charger and the number of plugs available. So I was referring to that chart on dollar amount per plug, up to 50% of the project within that dollar limit as we described it. So again, the combinations go, you're an applicant, you put in that one application, regardless of being one location or multiple locations, multiple chargers, that one application is only eligible up to $100,000. If you put in multiple applications, then as one applicant, one entity, I should say, then you're eligible for multiple funding tranches in that regard.
Thank you. What do you recommend is the first step to take in this process to apply for the program?
Our website has a fairly, what I describe as simple or simplified application form, and it only identifies the entity, the business entity that's putting in the application, the proposed site, the number of chargers, the type of chargers. And from that, as submitted, we can guide the applicant into further details through the application process. Ultimately, to be eligible for funding, each applicant has to sign off on a project agreement or an applicant agreement that is part of the application process, again, available on our website. So figuratively, we could call it a two-step event where the applicant puts in the application form and satisfactorily completing the details of what's being proposed, they'll enter into a project agreement thereafter. And once that is accepted by EPCOR, they're good to go. And as soon as the project itself is completed, and our deadline for completion of all these project applications is next year at March 31st, 2023. Then as soon as the project is complete, we'll begin the process to render them the reimbursement, or the funding as we'll call it, for their program.
Lindsay, if I might just add, I think just if I can just say in general as a first step, just reach out to EPCOR. So if you're thinking about it, you're trying to figure out whether you have an applicable project, you don't know whether where to start with a project, reach out to EPCOR, put you in touch with Bill, and he could work with any potential applicant to put together a proposal. So that'd be what I would recommend as a first step. If you haven't done anything else, is just reach out to EPCOR.
Yeah, I think collectively our team monitors the email that we've offered here, the goev@epcor.com, several times a day. So we're fairly proactive on the process. Thereafter, once we make a connection with the applicant, I provide my phone number and contact details, and we'll begin the process at that point. We're here to help.
Thank you. So I'll just let everyone know this is kind of our last call for questions. So if you do have any questions for Bill or Darren, please put them into the chat or the Q&A. I just have a couple more here, so I'll read those off, but please, if you have any more questions, put them in the Q&A. We're happy to stay on the line as long as needed to answer the questions. And of course, if you have like a more complex question, feel free to raise your hand, and then I can allow you to unmute yourself and you can ask your question directly to Bill and Darren. So for the last few questions here, is there a minimum number of chargers that need to be installed in order to qualify for funding?
No, there's no minimum dollar amount for the funding. There's no minimum number of chargers. So as an example, you could put in a small capacity level 2 charger, as long as it's in the correct location for eligibility. No, there is no limit.
Great.
Minimum, I should say. Pardon me. There is a limit, an upper limit, but I think the idea is each installation, what's available on the market, is a suitable and competent designed charger for any electric vehicle currently on the road or expected in the near future.
Great, thank you. One last question here. Are communal parking lots at condos or parking garages in residential settings eligible?
Yes.
Okay. Excellent. Okay, well, I'm not seeing any more questions in the Q&A or in the chat here. I'll have my colleague just pull up that last slide with EPCOR's contact info. I would like to remind anybody who's maybe watching the webinar at another time on our website to, if you have any questions that weren't answered during this webinar, please contact us at goev@epcor.com. But Bill and Darren, I'll pass it over to you to finish us off.
Thanks, Lindsay. I wanted to add one more item to the last question on the minimum, because I think it's an interesting question, and it just comes back to the purpose of this particular program and why the federal government is asking EPCOR, in this case, to act as a delivery organization, is that they're after those smaller projects. There is no minimum, as Bill mentioned. They're just looking for. There are 2 streams with the zero emissions vehicle infrastructure program. One stream is the projects have to be greater than $100,000. This stream is to capture those very, very small projects, $5,000 minimum of one charging plug. And so if that's your situation, then this is the program for you. So just to sum it up, thanks very much, Bill, for taking us through that program, and thank you all for joining us this morning. Look forward to engaging with you all in this exciting endeavor, and yeah, we can we can start to electrify our vehicle fleets and our vehicle in the public space. So thanks very much. Bill, any last words from yourself?
No, I want to thank participants for joining us today, and our team for setting this up. And I'm looking forward to hearing from all out there. Looking forward to working with you.
Thanks, Lindsay.